Hey folks, Dr. Mike here for Renaissance Periodization, and today I have solved every single mass gaining mystery you could ever wonder about. Just kidding, but I do have, how many? 8 tips in part 1 of this mini-series of mass gaining mysteries solved. You want to put on mass, you want to get jacked, you want to get huge, but you have a few questions. Don't you worry, I have a few answers. We're going to take this step by step. First is the question of what does intentional weight gain actually help? Can't you maintain your way or maintain your way to whatever jacked physique you want? Kind of, but there's 2 things to say about that. If you weigh 150 pounds and you're a little bit on the fatter side and you want to be 150 pounds, fucking chiseled lean, that means you have to drop quite a bit of fat, but also gain quite a bit of muscle. You could do this just by staying at 150, eating healthy and training, and slowly over time, your body is going to become more muscular and less fat. But that'll be a very long time because you're not using the most powerful 2 weapons that you have at your disposal nutritionally: a hypocaloric diet, intentionally eating less in order to burn fat faster, and a hypercaloric diet, gaining in order to put on muscle much faster. So instead of just staying at 150 and letting recomposition take its course, which it will, you can zigzag, go cut off some fat, gain some muscle and fat, cut off some fat, gain some muscle and fat. The zigzag will get you to that lean physique at 150 pounds faster, much faster than it will just to maintain. The other thing that intentional gaining helps is it'll get you to a place where you couldn't have gotten because you just straight up weren't big enough and your appetite couldn't get you there. If your appetite and you eating lots of food, whatever you want, as long as it's got protein in it, training weight's really hard. If your appetite gets you up to 170 pounds but won't budge you anymore, how the fuck are you supposed to weigh 180 and be 180 pounds jacked? There's nobody on this earth that weighs 170 pounds but is 180 jacked. It's a contradiction in terms. And at some point, being 180 just looks a lot more impressive than being 170, and that might be something you want. How do you get there? Well, if you can't maintain there, you've got to intentionally bulk to get there. An intentional weight gain, gaining a little bit of weight each week, stuffing yourself a little bit with food, will get you to a place where just eating and training won't. Big deal, huge deal, has to be something we say. Now, who should not bulk? Who should bulk? People that are well-trained, that are relatively lean or lean enough for them, and want to put on as much muscle mass as possible over the long term should do occasional periods of bulking to put on that muscle. Who should not bulk? I can think of at least a few people. One, if you're not comfortable with the idea of gaining weight yet psychologically, namaste, no big deal, chill out, go through periods of maintenance and fat loss until you're good with it, and then maybe you can bulk or you can never bulk. The other people are beginners. People new to training and new to dieting. They're so fresh, they can benefit hugely from just staying at the same body weight, roughly thereabouts, not intentionally trying to gain weight, because they're so new to training and so new to dieting, they're going to gain a ton of muscle, not even trying. And then, not even trying to bulk intentionally. Once they have gotten very muscular, they can take a little bit of time to get lean. And once they're very lean and muscular, training for 2 or 3 years, then they can do their first intentional bulk. You can always do an intentional bulk sooner, but you don't have to. So that intentional bulk may not be for you. Give that some thought. A lot of times people start training and dieting, and a week later they're like, time to bulk. And I'm like, man, you started at 15% fat. You could bulk to where you're 18% fat and very muscular in a few months. What you could have just done is just continued eating normal high protein diet, really training. Over a couple months, you would have come down to 12 or 11% fat. Then when you bulked up, you'd just be bulked to 15, still quite lean. All of the benefits, none of the downsides of getting too fat. So don't rush into bulking if you are in that position. Next, how fast should you gain? It's tempting to try to gain as fast as possible. The problem is, and something most people know, is that the fraction of body fat you gain if you go really quick is really gnarly. It's gaining fast is a good ticket to just get really, really fat, which sucks because you have to diet off the fat. It's not healthy for you. It makes you look like shit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what do you do instead? I think that you should gain at somewhere between half a pound to a pound per week in the typical mass gaining phase. Half a pound to a pound per week. Half a pound if you're on the more fat phobic side. If you're on the smaller side, if you're a 130-pound girl, half a pound per week is great. If you're on the larger side, you are okay with putting on a bit of extra fat. If it means a little bit more muscle, gaining up to a pound a week is totally cool. For you kilo folks out in the rest of the world, 0.25 to 0.5 kilos a week. Here's the thing, just as a thought experiment. A lot of females have trouble with gaining weight. They say, I don't want to get fat. Hold on a sec. Let's say it's a 12-week massing phase. That's 3 months of intentional weight gain. That's a lot. You're going to gain a lot of muscle. But you're only doing half a pound per week. That's 6 pounds gained. 6 pounds you can lose in 2 or 3 weeks of fat loss dieting right after if you don't want to. And it's barely notable body fat-wise on your physique. Half a pound per week is a great clip. And if you want to go a bit faster, up to a pound per week is totally cool in most cases. Point number 4, how long should you bulk for? Bulking for a long time is not so determined by how much fat you gain, because you can actually bulk successfully into a relatively high body fat and everything goes well. The number one determinant of how to cap your bulking phase, your massing phase, your muscle gain phase, is how much training fatigue you accumulate. After roughly 12 to 16 weeks of multiple mesocycles of hard training with bulking, you're going to run into a problem. The problem is your body is so desensitized to training and so fucking beat up that you can't train at your hardest anymore reliably week on week on week. And if you can't train very hard anymore week on week on week, why are you bulking? That's like, sending a rocket up to space. You're like, yeah, I think half the fuel's in there. We should get the rocket out of orbit. Are we sure about that? So what you want to do is make sure that you bulk for as long as you can, or as long as you have planned. If it's 16 weeks, if it's 20 weeks, if it's 24, wherever your training starts to fall apart, take an active rest phase, take a maintenance phase, reduce your body's desensitization to hypertrophy, potentially do a fat loss phase. We'll talk about that in just a bit. And then start bulking again. But people say like, oh, I'm bulking for a year straight. No, you're not. You're not going to train hard for a year straight. And if you are, you're not training hard enough week on week anyway. Number 5, clean versus dirty bulk. This is a situation that is partly mythical and won't die, and just bros on Reddit keep talking about it. Food composition is important to health. It's not so important to your body composition. You can eat exclusively dirty foods, potato chips, etc., and you'll still gain roughly the same amount of muscle and fat, roughly. The problem is it's really hard to hit good macros. You'll have too many fats, not enough carbs, your training will be shit if you eat mostly junk foods. So the core of every good muscle gaining plan should be mostly healthy foods to give you really, really good macros. Lots of protein, tons of carbs, and enough fats to keep you going, but not so much fat to overwhelm digestion and reduce the number of carbs, and your pumps get worse and all that other crap. So clean bulking is the core of every plan. But is it okay a few times a week to have a few little goodies and junk food and some cheat meals if it's going to help you get to your weight gain goal and it's not making you a fat, slobbery mess? 100%. So what I would say is, if you say clean bulking is over here, dirty bulking is over here, somewhere right in this area between clean and dirty bulking, or actually, sorry, dirty bulking is over here, right in this area closer to clean bulking, but a couple dirty stuff, things every now and again, a couple times a week is totally cool, and probably for most people, the best way to go. So I would say this is not one of those clean versus dirty. It's mostly clean, but a little bit of dirty. It's like the bedroom. I've never been in the bedroom before in that respect. So hypothetically, that analogy holds. Number 6, when do you cut the fat off? As you bulk, almost inevitably in most cases, you will gain some measure of muscle and some measure of fat. When is it time to start cutting the fat off? I'll tell you when it's not time. When it's been like 3 weeks and you first start to notice you're a little bit fatter and you're like, fuck it, I need to cut. You need to gain for at least 4 weeks for most of that muscle to stick around. Ideally, more like 8 or 12 or 16 weeks. As soon as you hit that point where your training isn't good anymore, and you can't push your massing phase any harder because your body is desensitized to training or you're too beat up in all of your joints to keep going, then you take an active rest phase, which is 2 weeks of really easy training or no training at all. You might take another 2 to 4 weeks of maintenance, which is training in sets of 5 to 10, very low maintenance volumes, about a third of the volume, third of the number of sets you would typically do. Maybe if you typically train 6 days a week, you train 4, really cool the body off, let it really, really settle, really get sensitive to training again. Then what you can do after is a fat loss phase to get rid of pretty much all of the fat you gained during the last massing phase. And that should take somewhere between 4 and 8 weeks in most cases. Like if you did a 16-week bulk, an 8-week fat loss diet should absolutely take all the fat off that you put on. Once you're finished with that diet, take a week of active rest or something like that and get right back into bulking, no problem. It'll be really awesome. If you take fat loss phases more sparingly, that's okay. You'll get great results, but you'll get fatter and fatter and fatter over time. It just means you'll have to do a really gnarly series of fat loss phases, or one really long one later, and that's no fun. So I'd recommend, yeah, every 12 to 16 weeks after a massing phase is over, if you're interested in it, another after active rest and a little bit of maintenance training, 4 to 8 week fat loss phase can really get you going. Typically, we call that a mini cut, especially if it's 3 to 6 weeks long. That's totally cool as well. But some fat loss phase to get the fat off, to get you going again, is a really good idea. You don't just want to become the Michelin Man eventually. Point number 7. Do you need mass gainer shakes? No. But you could be in a position where a mass gainer shake is an easy way for you to get a high carb, high protein amount of calories. It's an excellent thing to take after a really hard training session. You finish your training shake, or you don't have a training shake. You get a mass gainer shake going, you take a shower, you relax, you do whatever, you work a little bit. Then you get hungry, you have your first whole food meal. A mass gainer shake is also great because it's easy on the stomach. A lot of times after really hard training, you're not so hungry. And if you eat a ton of food, you start wanting to throw it up. A mass gainer shake can be great. If that describes you, absolutely consider a mass gainer shake. But the idea that mass gainer shake is magic, and that it's somehow, if you add it into your plan, you're going to just explode with new muscle, that's not the case. It's not made of steroids or some shit. It's just food blended and refined down to be really easy to eat. That's the only magic it has for you. Lastly, what happens when you're just not hungry enough to continue to gain? You can't eat the food. I have a couple suggestions. One is to try to make your food tastier, flavor it better. There's tons of flavorings at the store, tons of recipes online. You can do a good job. If your food is tastier, you can generally eat more of it. Another thing is to raise your dietary fats a little bit. If you're trying to eat super clean, you have 30 grams of fat per day and you're bulking, that's tough. Go up to 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 grams of fat per day, and all of a sudden, your calories are way higher, you're gaining a ton. That extra fat is getting your sex drive up and your training motivation through the roof, and all of a sudden it's really great, and it boosts your calories a ton. Another thing is to have a couple of weekly fun cheat meals to help you get going. Mass gainer shakes are another option. And at the end of the day, if all of those things run their course, and eventually they will, you won't be hungry enough to hit your surplus, then it's time for a fat loss phase. Generally speaking, if you plan things out right, if you start nice and lean, the beginning of a muscle gain phase, that phase takes 12 to 16 weeks and no more. You'll get nice and full at the end. You do your recovery period, your active rest, and your maintenance. And then when you drop down and do your fat loss phase, at the end of that fat loss phase, at the beginning, you're not hungry at all. It's the easiest fat loss phase ever. At the end of that fat loss phase, 7 or 8 weeks later, you're going to be pretty fucking lean and pretty fucking hungry, which potentiates you for another 12 to 16 weeks of massing. Circle of life, Simba, Mufasa, Scar, the hyenas, all the motherfuckers are there. And speaking of there, I'll see you guys in a little bit with part 2 of this series. Thank you so much for tuning in. See you then.